In the heart of imperial Rome, where poets praised beauty and emperors built monuments to glory, there existed another empire, one hidden beneath marble floors and perfumed air. It was not forged by armies or legions, but by the quiet cruelty of domestic breeding, where slaves were not merely owned, but created. This was the empire of the Domus, the private house, a world where motherhood was a sentence, and birth itself was commerce. What you are about to hear is not myth or madness, but the buried truth of civilization's most revered empire, a truth Rome itself tried to erase. In the summer of 68 AD, as the empire convulsed beneath Nero's failing rule, the air around the Palatine Hill grew heavy with whispers. Rome's marble heart beat with decay. Senators plotted, slaves vanished, and the great villas stood like tombs of luxury. Among them rose the Domus Aelia, a mansion renowned not for politics or art, but for its silence. Its mistress, Aelia Cassia, daughter of the late Senator Gaius Cassius Varro, inherited not just wealth, but an ideology. Aelia believed perfection was divine order, and disorder a sin. To her, the Roman household was a microcosm of empire, every life within its walls existing to serve hierarchy. She kept scrolls of breeding records alongside family genealogies, as if her slaves were livestock meant to improve the purity of Rome itself. She claimed inspiration from Aristotle's writings on natural slavery and Pliny's observations of heredity. Scholars saw philosophy. Aelia saw justification. Beneath her villa, under arches carved with mythic scenes, lay the Cubicula Obscura, a subterranean complex unknown to guests. There, chained women carried Aelia's vision in their wombs. They were called domesticae generatrices, houseborn mothers. Few had names anymore. Some had been bought at the Forum Boarium, others bred within the house itself. None had seen sunlight in years. Lucius Varro, the steward and former tutor to Aelia's brother, oversaw this hidden estate. He recorded every birth, every death, every deformity. He knew how many infants lived past 7 days. He measured their strength, their docility, their obedience. In ledgers sealed with Aelia's wax insignia, the numbers looked clean, almost holy. But Lucius could not unsee the rot behind them. Each morning, incense rose through the villa as Aelia performed libations to Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth. She prayed not for mercy, but for control. The air carried a sweet fragrance masking the odor of sickness below. When her guests arrived, senators, generals, and temple patrons, she entertained them with philosophy. "A house must breed loyalty as a field breeds grain," she once said, her tone calm, her eyes glacial. They praised her intellect, unaware that beneath their sandals the ground throbbed with muffled sobs. In one chamber, a mother cradled her stillborn child in silence, forbidden to wail. Her tears fell onto cold stone already stained with others before her. Lucius, watching from the doorway, felt something fracture within him, a tremor of shame buried beneath decades of obedience. Yet he bowed to Aelia when she passed, her silk robes brushing against the air like a quiet execution. Outside, Rome roared with rebellion and spectacle. The Colosseum was not yet built, but cruelty already ruled the city's pulse. While gladiators bled for the masses, the Domus Aelia cultivated a quieter horror, one measured not in screams, but in lineage. At night, when the villa slept, Lucius could hear the infants' faint cries echo through the stone halls. They mingled with the sound of the Tiber below, carrying Rome's sins toward the sea. He sometimes wondered if the gods listened, or if they too had turned their faces away. For within those walls, Aelia Cassia's house had ceased to be a home. It had become an altar, and every birth was a sacrifice. At dawn, the Forum Boarium stirred like a waking beast. The smell of sweat, iron, and olive oil mingled in the air as merchants set up their stalls beneath the ancient arches of the Temple of Hercules. It was here, among cattle pens and grain wagons, that Rome's other trade flourished, the buying and selling of human life. The crowd's murmurs carried the rhythm of commerce, not conscience. Lucius Varro walked through it with a trained eye. His master's list was precise: 2 fertile women, aged under 20. 1 male, strong in limb, but docile in nature. He moved between the rows of chained bodies, each branded with a symbol of ownership. Some bore the scars of previous masters. Others were freshly washed, their skin oiled to hide the bruises. The auctioneer shouted in practiced Latin, his tone as casual as a fishmonger's. When a young Numidian woman was presented, tall, unbroken gaze, wide-hipped, the bidding began fast. Lucius raised his wax tablet discreetly. "For the Domus Aelia," he whispered to the broker. The name alone made the man hesitate, then bow. In the undercurrent of Rome's elite, Aelia Cassia's household carried both awe and dread. Her buyers always paid in full, in gold, never questioned, never traced. Beside her agent stood priests of Venus Genetrix, pretending sanctity as they blessed the purchase of new house servants. Their chants disguised the horror with ritual. The Roman law used gentium, allowed the breeding of slaves if done under domestic authority, a right justified as natural, even divine. Philosophers debated whether slaves possessed souls. None dared speak of their children. Lucius signed the parchments, sealing the fate of 3 more lives. He watched the woman's expression. No tears, no pleading, only a resigned stillness. He wondered if she understood Latin or if silence was her only shield. Around him, laughter echoed. A senator's wife, veiled in crimson silk, pointed at a naked boy being appraised for beauty. "He will fetch a good price for domestic display," she said. Rome's cruelty were perfume and pearls. By midday, the sun burned through the forum's smoke. Aelia's wagons arrived, their interiors lined with linen to conceal the human cargo. The new acquisitions were led inside, bound yet calm, as if they already sensed the unspoken law. The house of Aelia consumes everything. Lucius oversaw the loading in silence, his thoughts heavy with unease. He had once believed service to Aelia was an honor. Now, each purchase felt like another stone laid upon a grave no one would mark. Before departing, he passed a stall selling clay figurines of the goddess Fortuna. The merchant, an old Greek freedman, caught his gaze. "Luck favors all but the owned," he said softly. Lucius dropped a coin and walked away, unsure if it was guilt or the gods whispering through a stranger's voice. Back at the villa, Aelia awaited him in the atrium, her fingers tracing a silver statue of Juno. The sunlight caught her pale face, unearthly calm. Were the selections satisfactory? She asked. Lucius presented the ledgers. She studied them like sacred text. "Good," she murmured. "May the wombs of the strong deliver the obedient." That night, the new slaves were led below, their chains echoing through marble halls. The villa seemed to breathe, alive with unseen suffering. Above, Aelia dined beneath frescoes of Venus and Mars, the gods of love and war. For in Rome, the two had always shared the same altar. And in the Domus Aelia, their worship demanded flesh. The Domus Aelia was a palace of contradictions. Above, the scent of myrrh and music of fountains. Below, the stench of oil lamps and the rhythm of childbirth echoing through stone. Beneath the atrium mosaics depicting divine mothers, another generation came into the world unseen. Here, birth was not a miracle, it was production. The birthing chambers, known only to the inner household, were carved into the bedrock beneath the villa's eastern wing. Small, arched vaults lined with lime plaster served as both nursery and tomb. The walls were inscribed not with prayers, but with numbers, tallies of births, deaths, and stillborns. Each figure was scratched by Lucius Varro's hand at Aelia's command. "Record the failures," she would say, "so the next generation will be stronger." The women labored in silence, bound by an order punishable by mutilation. No screaming, no prayer, no names. Midwives, most of them slaves themselves, enforced this decree with a terrible devotion born of fear. They smeared olive oil on cracked lips, whispered warnings, and smothered cries with cloths steeped in vinegar. To Aelia, pain was purification. Noise is rebellion, she once wrote in her private journals. Obedience must begin in the womb. Every few weeks, Aelia descended into the lower halls. Her presence chilled the air. Dressed in pale linen, she moved between the birthing cells like a priestess inspecting sacrifices. She touched the foreheads of newborns, studied their limbs, their skin tone, their breathing. Healthy, she would murmur of one. Weak, of another, and that word sealed the infant's fate. Weakness was waste. Those deemed unfit were taken by attendants to a separate room, known among the slaves as the cold place. None returned from it. Lucius followed her on these rounds, his face expressionless. Yet each inspection carved deeper into his conscience. He watched a mother beg with her eyes to keep her child. Aelia ignored her entirely, focusing instead on the baby's features, measuring beauty as though it were currency. "This one has symmetry," she said softly, tracing the infant's cheek. "Keep her alive." Then she turned, leaving the mother's trembling hands behind. The chosen infants were branded behind the ear with a mark shaped like a vine, the sigil of the Domus Aelia. Their records were entered into ledgers categorized by lineage and temperament. Some were raised within the villa, trained as servants or attendants to the household. Others were promised to senators before they could walk. To Aelia, this was Rome's triumph, the domestication of humanity itself. At night, when the house above slept, Lucius would visit the lower chambers with a single lamp. He would whisper Latin lullabies, the kind his mother once sang in his boyhood. The women, half-conscious from exhaustion, would listen in silence. It was the only mercy he could offer, sound in a place forbidden of it. One evening, as he turned to leave, he found a newborn with eyes the color of his own. A midwife bowed her head, saying nothing. Lucius froze, heart trembling. The record scroll beside the crib bore his name under sire. He knew what that meant. The child belonged not to him, but to Aelia's experiment. As he stood in that flickering light, the truth struck him with unbearable clarity. The Domus Aelia was not a home, it was a machine, and he was one of its gears. Above him, water trickled through the marble floors, carrying the echoes of muted weeping upward, until the fountain sang over them, drowning history's most private screams. By the year 70 AD, as Vespasian's legions rebuilt Rome from the ashes of Nero's ruin, Aelia Cassia's villa thrived in silence. The Domus Aelia had become more than a household, it was a doctrine. Within its marble walls, cruelty had been refined into theory, polished into philosophy, written into permanence. The doctrine took the form of a series of scrolls, bound in leather and sealed with Aelia's insignia. She titled it De Servorum Generatione, on the breeding of servants. To her, it was not merely instruction but revelation. The text blended fragments from Aristotle, passages from Pliny's natural history, and her own chilling additions. She argued that just as Rome bred horses for war and hounds for loyalty, so too must the empire cultivate its servants through controlled lineage. "The womb," she wrote, "is the empire's most obedient field." Her philosophy spread quietly among Rome's elite. Copies of her writings, disguised as household management treatises, circulated through private circles. Senators whispered her name at banquets. Matrons cited her as justification for their cruelty. Aelia became a ghostly authority, never publicly acknowledged, yet privately revered. The breeding of slaves, long an unspoken practice, now carried a veneer of virtue. Lucius Varro watched this transformation with dread. He saw the ledgers multiply, the breeding chambers expand. Slaves were now paired like livestock, chosen for strength or beauty, their unions dictated by scroll and seal. Aelia's new system even classified them by temperament. Category I, submissive. Category 2, skilled. Category 3, rebellious, often culled. The language of humanity had vanished from her records. At gatherings in her atrium, Aelia read excerpts aloud to guests, patricians, generals, and priests who nodded solemnly as if hearing divine truth. To master another's body is power, she would say. But to master the bloodline, that is eternity. The guests applauded. Some requested her guidance in establishing their own domestic breeding programs. Rome's cruelty, once instinctual, was becoming institutional. One evening, Lucius entered her study to deliver new reports. The rooms smelled of wax and ink. Scrolls lay scattered, covered in diagrams of human proportions, notes on fertility, sketches of infants marked with her vine-shaped brand. Aelia, serene and pale, looked up from her writing. "You hesitate," she said, her tone flat. "My lady," Lucius murmured, "these children, they do not live as servants. They live as captives." Aelia smiled faintly, as though amused by his simplicity. "You misunderstand, Lucius. Captivity is not cruelty when it serves perfection. They are born into purpose. We have freed them from chaos." He bowed, retreating into silence. Yet the weight of her words lingered long after. That night, he reread the ledgers by lamplight. Each number seemed to bleed through the parchment. He wondered how history would judge them, if judgment even existed for those buried in marble. Weeks later, a senator's envoy arrived, seeking to purchase homeborn attendants trained from birth and obedience. The transaction was swift, the payment immense. Rome's hunger for such servants grew insatiable. And in the quiet of her villa, Aelia Cassia dipped her quill into ink and continued her sacred work. She believed herself not a monster, but a reformer, the architect of a new domestic order. Outside, Rome rebuilt temples to its gods. Inside, Aelia built her own, upon the bodies of the forgotten. By the middle of 72 AD, the Domus Aelia had reached the height of its silent industry. Each month, more children were born beneath its marble floors, trained, branded, and catalogued. The system functioned with chilling precision, but within its perfect rhythm, one man began to fracture. Lucius Varro had long been the steward of Aelia's empire, the quiet executor of her will. Yet the discovery of the infant who shared his eyes haunted him like a fevered ghost. He had fathered dozens of children under Aelia's orders, his body used as an instrument of her breeding design. But this one, the boy with gray eyes, awakened something he thought long buried: shame, and something dangerously close to love. At night, Lucius descended into the lower chambers to look upon the child, hidden among rows of cradles. The midwives knew better than to speak his name aloud. But one of them, an old Syrian woman named Nerida, whispered, "The gods marked him." She gestured toward the faint crescent scar behind the infant's ear, the symbol of the house. "No," Lucius murmured, his voice trembling. "That mark will mean more than she knows." From that night onward, Lucius began leaving subtle changes in the records, an inverted symbol here, a miscopied number there, small acts of defiance invisible to all but him. When Aelia ordered another child marked, he quietly carved the crescent deeper, shaping it into a hidden curve resembling the moon. To others it was routine. To him it was a prayer, a message to a future that might never come. Aelia, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to his unrest. Her attention was consumed by correspondence with other noble families who sought to replicate her methods. She spoke of expanding the program to villas along the Appian Way, creating a network of house-born servants bred to serve Rome's finest. "One generation," she told Lucius during supper, "and obedience will no longer need to be taught. It will live in the blood." Lucius bowed but said nothing. Inside, his silence screamed. That same week, he received a visit from Gaius Falco, a senator and former admirer of Aelia's late father. Over goblets of watered wine, Falco inquired about rumors, whispers of infants branded at birth, of women who never left the villa. Lucius hesitated. The truth burned on his tongue, yet fear chained it. He simply said, "The lady's work is of private devotion, my lord. She seeks to perfect her household, nothing more." Falco studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "Rome is built on such perfections," he said coldly, and left. That night, Lucius could not sleep. He dreamt of the villa's walls collapsing, the marble cracking to reveal a sea of buried infants. When he awoke, he found his hands trembling. He walked to the child's cradle and traced the moon-shaped mark with his finger. "Remember me," he whispered. "Remember this sin." In the days that followed, Aelia announced a new decree. Older slaves would no longer be used for breeding. The younger generation, those already born of the house, would now pair among themselves, purity through lineage. Lucius felt his stomach twist. He had created a cycle that would devour itself. Above ground, Rome celebrated its new emperor's triumphs. Below, the Domus Aelia celebrated another birth. Lucius Varro knew he had become both father and accomplice, and that his blood would stain the empire long after his name turned to dust. By the winter of 73 AD, the air in Rome trembled with celebration. Saturnalia had begun, the ancient festival when social order inverted. Masters served slaves, and the city surrendered to chaos. Laughter, song, and wine overflowed from every street. Yet behind the sealed gates of the Domus Aelia, the inversion took on a far darker form. Aelia Cassia despised disorder but understood spectacle. To her, Saturnalia was opportunity, a test of devotion for her homeborn creations. She ordered a grand banquet for her peers, senators and matrons, eager for distraction from the empire's unrest. The atrium was adorned with garlands, torches, and gold-leafed masks. Musicians played flutes beside marble fountains as guests arrived in silks and perfumes, unknowing that the night's entertainment would come not from jesters, but from the depths below. Lucius Varro stood among the attendants, face pale beneath his laurel wreath. He had received the instructions that morning. Select a dozen of the houseborn youths for presentation. They were to perform obedience, Aelia had said, a living display of what her doctrine had achieved. The chosen stood silently in the antechamber, draped in white cloth, their branded marks gleaming like jewelry. Some were no older than 12. As the feast began, Aelia rose to speak. "On this night, masters serve slaves," she declared, her voice echoing beneath the coffered ceiling. "And yet, in this house, all serve perfection." The guests laughed, mistaking her solemnity for wit. Servants poured wine into golden cups until it spilled onto marble like blood. Then came the spectacle. At Aelia's signal, the homeborn entered the hall. The musicians fell silent. The children moved with rehearsed grace, bowing, kneeling, reciting lines from her doctrine. "We were born to serve," they said in unison, voices eerily calm. The audience applauded. A senator's wife wiped a tear, murmuring, "Such purity." Aelia watched with serene pride. But as the ritual continued, something in the room shifted. One of the older boys, tall and scarred, faltered in his recitation. His eyes met Lucius's across the room, a flicker of recognition or plea. Aelia's expression hardened. "Continue," she hissed. The boy did not. Instead, he whispered something under his breath, words drowned by the rustle of the crowd. Aelia stepped forward and struck him across the face with her jeweled hand. Gasps followed. Laughter returned to mask discomfort. "Even the perfect must be corrected," she said softly, smiling again. The feast resumed, louder now, wine flowing like a river meant to drown memory. Yet for Lucius, the noise became unbearable. He slipped away from the hall and descended to the lower chambers, where the unused birthing rooms now stored amphorae of grain. There, amid the shadows, he found the midwife Nerida, lighting a small clay lamp before a hidden altar. "The gods turn their faces," she whispered. "Tonight they will not see what she does." When Lucius returned upstairs, the ritual had ended. The guests danced, drunk on cruelty disguised as revelry. Aelia stood before them, radiant in white, her hands stained faintly with blood where her ring had cut the boy's skin. "To Saturn," she toasted, "who grants freedom for a day and reminds us why it cannot last." The laughter that followed echoed through the villa like a curse. For within the house of Aelia, Saturnalia never ended. The inversion of mercy had become permanent, and the gods of Rome, if they still listened, had learned to enjoy the sound. When the last of Saturnalia's torches died, silence fell upon the Domus Aelia like the closing of a tomb. The guests had departed in drunken satisfaction, unaware that beneath their laughter, something had begun to stir. In the lowest chambers of the villa, where the scent of herbs and iron mingled, Narita the midwife sat before her altar, whispering prayers to forgotten gods. Her hands, wrinkled and scarred, trembled as she washed away traces of blood that would not fade. Lucius found her there before dawn. He had not slept. The image of the boy's defiance and Aelia's cold precision haunted him. "You've served her longer than I," he said quietly. "Tell me what you know." Narita looked up, her eyes hollow yet sharp. "You think you've seen cruelty, scribe? You have only seen its shadow. What Aelia calls perfection was born from despair." She motioned to the chair opposite her. "Sit, you must hear what you serve." The chamber was lit only by one oil lamp. Its flame danced across the walls, illuminating jars filled with strange powders, dried flowers, and in one corner, bones too small to be mistaken for animals. In her youth, Narita began, Aelia Cassia was barren. Her first husband, the praetor Flavius Cassius, sought heirs for his name. Physicians blamed her womb. Priests claimed divine punishment. But Aelia would not accept the will of gods or men. She turned to forbidden science, the art of selective breeding among slaves. She began experiments on conception, believing she could shape obedience into blood. Lucius listened, every word sinking like lead. "You helped her?" "I was a slave," Narita replied. "Obedience was not choice. She made me midwife to her heresy." She reached for a scroll hidden beneath her cloak, brittle parchment marked with diagrams of human forms. "Here," she said, handing it to him. Records of the unions she ordered. Of the children she claimed as divine prototypes. Half of them never lived to see daylight. Lucius unrolled the scroll, his stomach tightening. Names, measurements, symbols, each representing a life reduced to an experiment. "And those who survived? They became her houseborn," Narita whispered. "The ones you parade at her feasts. She believes the purity of Rome can be reborn through them, a new class of servants who never rebel, never question. Aelia thinks she is saving the empire from its own decay. But she is merely building its mirror, a Rome that devours its children to remain eternal." Her voice broke. "I have buried more infants than the gods ever blessed. Their cries still echo when I sleep." Lucius's hand shook as he rolled the parchment shut. "Why tell me this now?" "Because the gods are stirring again," Narita said. "The boy who defied her last night, he was born in defiance of her order. His mother was a slave who prayed to Hecate. He carries the mark of the old powers." When he spoke, the torches flickered. "Did you not see?" Lucius had seen, the brief dimming of flame, the shudder that passed through the hall. He had dismissed it as fear. Now he was not certain. "She will destroy him," Narita continued. "Unless someone acts. You serve her quill, but your ink could become a weapon. Write her history as truth, not praise." He hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. "And you?" "I have only confession left," she murmured. "Soon she will sense my guilt. But confession is the one thing she cannot own." Outside, the first light of morning bled over Rome. Within the chamber, Narita's flame trembled, then went out. The darkness that followed was not absence. It was warning. In the year 71 AD, Rome changed its face. The ashes of Nero's madness had cooled, and Emperor Vespasian rose to rebuild what tyranny had burned. But with reconstruction came scrutiny. An empire that sought order demanded visibility. Every house, every whisper, every deviation from Roman virtue was subject to the imperial eye. It was during this fever of surveillance that the name Aelia Cassia reached the Praetorian Guard. A report, unsigned, half-burned, had been found in the archives of the Senate Library. It spoke of unnatural births, of slaves bred as though they were livestock, of infants whose corpses were never recorded in temple registers. The scroll bore no author, yet its script matched that of Lucius Varro, once Aelia's scribe, now vanished without trace. The prefect of the guard summoned an investigator, Marcus Flaccus, a man known for discretion rather than mercy. Once a soldier in Germania, Flaccus had learned that monsters often wore togas. His orders were simple: go to the Domus Aelia on the Palatine Hill, observe, report, and above all, do not offend the lady. Her patrons reach the emperor himself. Flaccus entered the house at dusk. The marble floors gleamed like bone. Slaves moved silently, eyes downcast, their bodies marked by precision rather than punishment. In the courtyard, he paused before a fresco depicting Saturn devouring his child. The paint had not faded, its red looked disturbingly fresh. Aelia received him in a hall scented with myrrh. She was draped in white linen, her hair bound in silver thread. Her eyes carried the calm of someone who had never been denied. "The Empire sends its concern to my doorstep," she said softly. "How flattering." Flaccus bowed. "Rome rebuilds. Every house must be pure." "Purity," she repeated, tasting the word. "A word for men who fear decay. But tell me, Prefect, does Rome ever ask how purity is achieved?" He did not answer. His gaze wandered to the walls, lined with tapestries concealing doors. Behind one, faint cries echoed, thin as breath. "I will need to inspect your quarters," he said. Aelia smiled, motioning toward the inner chambers. "Then inspect, but tread gently." Word spread quietly through Rome's underbelly. The priests called it an abomination, the scholars a tragedy. Yet no official record mentioned it. The emperor, fearing unrest, ordered the ruins filled with rubble. History would bury its shame beneath new marble. But one man returned. Marcus Flaccus, once the investigator of the imperial eye, now old and forgotten, heard the rumors whispered by laborers near the hill. He came limping through the rubble, a torch in hand, his heart heavy with memories he had long silenced. He had written the report that vanished. Now the ground itself had rewritten it in bone. He descended through a fissure in the foundation, the air growing colder with each step. The torchlight flickered against walls, painted with faded lunar symbols. And there, half buried under debris, he found what the fire had not consumed: the last chamber, the sanctum of Aelia Cassia. At its center lay a stone table carved with Latin inscriptions: Servorum Generatione, the divine generation of slaves. Around it, skeletons of women knelt in a circle, their skulls tilted toward the table, their hands bound in ritual posture. Between them, fragments of scrolls clung to the damp walls, ink dissolved, but one line still legible: "From the seed of servitude shall rise Rome reborn." Flaccus sank to his knees. His torchlight revealed a small object lodged between two ribs, a bronze stylus. Engraved with initials, LV, he knew them instantly. Lucius Varro, Aelia's scribe, the man who had vanished after writing the Forbiddance record. On the wall above the table, carved deep into stone, was a crescent moon. Beneath it, an inscription scratched in haste, perhaps with that same stylus: "The womb remembers." Tears blurred the old soldier's sight. He reached out, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. "You tried to warn us," he murmured. A sound echoed, the crack of settling stone, or perhaps a whisper. He thought he heard voices, faint, childlike, overlapping, rising like a chorus from the darkness. Mother, mother. The torch wavered. Its flame bent toward the carving, as though drawn by unseen breath. For the first time in his long life, Marcus Flaccus prayed not for Rome, but for the dead it had devoured. When dawn came, the entrance was sealed once more. The ruins of the Domus Aelia vanished beneath layers of reconstruction. But beneath those stones, the chamber remained silent, waiting, its walls breathing with the memory of the lives Rome chose to forget. Centuries passed. The palaces of the Palatine crumbled into memory, their marble stolen to build churches, their gardens swallowed by dust. The name Aelia Cassia vanished from Roman ledgers, replaced by newer saints and emperors. Yet the earth remembers what men forget. In 1889, during excavations near the ruins of Domitian's palace, a group of archaeologists uncovered a sealed chamber. It was narrow, airless, lined with clay urns and brittle fragments of parchment. Among them, wrapped in layers of decayed silk, lay a manuscript so fragile that it turned to powder when touched. Only the first page survived intact. Written in faded ink, it bore the title, De Servorum Generatione, on the breeding of servants. At first, scholars dismissed it as a forgery, a grim invention of the medieval imagination. But linguistic analysis revealed first-century Latin, its syntax precise, its terminology unmistakably Romane. The document described the domestic experiments of an unnamed matron who sought to refine the human stock through calculated unions among her slaves. It spoke of lunar rituals, selective reproduction, and the belief that obedience could be shaped into flesh. The curator of antiquities at the Capitoline Museum, Dr. Aurelius Conti, compared the text to scattered references found in imperial correspondence, brief, censored mentions of a domus on the Palatine investigated under Vespasian's rule. His report, later published in 1892, concluded that the manuscript may preserve a suppressed chapter of Roman domestic history, the doctrine of hereditary servitude. Long denied yet disturbingly methodical. Within months, the Vatican ordered the text sealed. Copies vanished. Only Conti's notes remain, where one line was copied verbatim: "To own the womb is to own the future." Outside the archives, rumors grew. Locals spoke of strange sounds beneath the Palatine at night, the echo of children's cries or whispers in languages no longer spoken. The excavation site was closed, declared unstable. Yet some claimed that before it was sealed again, workers had found walls etched with crescent symbols and skeletal remains laid in precise rows, their bones arranged like letters of a forgotten alphabet. In academic circles, debate raged for decades. Was De Servorum Generatione a lost treatise on eugenic centuries before its time? Or the confession of a deranged patrician woman whose crimes were buried by the empire she served? The scholars disagreed, but the language of the text was chillingly unemotional, its tone more scientific than sacrilegious. In 1932, one historian, Dr. Helena Orsini, traced the name Aelia Cassia in fragmentary imperial tax records. She noted payments to midwives and physicians under her household seal, coinciding with unexplained disappearances of slaves in the surrounding districts. Her final paper concluded, "The Domus Aelia may have represented the earliest recorded attempt at systematic human control within a domestic sphere." The line between divinity and cruelty was merely academic. Soon after, Orsini's apartment burned. Her research, like Conti's, was never recovered. Today, tourists walk the Palatine unaware of the chamber beneath their feet. Guides speak of emperors, triumphs, and love affairs, not of women who sought to breed perfection from bondage. Yet the soil keeps its testimony. Each rainstorm uncovers fragments of bone, each excavation another whisper of the doctrine Rome buried beneath its pride. In the museum's restricted archive, The surviving scrap of the manuscript remains locked in glass. The ink has nearly vanished, but under lamplight, one sentence can still be read, written in a calm, deliberate hand. The womb remembers. History, it seems, does not repent. It simply waits for new hands to continue the work.